Well, some T20 cricket is about to kick off. Hello, listeners. Welcome back to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I'm Manners, and we're recording this just a few hours before Australia takes on the mighty Scots in Edinburgh. Joining me for this episode, back from commentating in the Pacific region of the ICC qualifiers, Daniel Beswick. Daniel, welcome.
G'day, Manners. Damo, how's things?
Good.
And joining me as well is Damien Watson. Damien, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad, Metters. Good to have you back, Daniel, as well. Looking forward to the Australia v Scotland game, and I'm interested in one element of the rundown as well that we might get to off the top in terms of naming Metters. It brings back a lot of memories, this.
Absolutely. Well, we've got a lot to get to in this episode. The cricket world never stops. We're going to talk a little bit about the series against Scotland, talk about some concerning news around Will Pucovski. There's also some news happening in England. Joe Root's making a case to be the best test batter in the world at the moment. Maybe we'll hotly debate that topic. Then we'll bring it on home with a little bit of Can't Let It Go. But you're right, Damien. Let's start with the first bit of news. Since our last podcast, Cricket Australia has put out a press release that they're looking to rename the one-day domestic cup after a legendary player. They've got a new sponsor, but I don't think they're the naming rights sponsor, and have thrown it open to the public to suggest what the one-day domestic cup should be named as. So I'll throw it open to the floor. I've got a few ideas, but Daniel, because you're just back, you can go first. What do you think? Who would you name it after?
Might be showing my sort of baggy blue bias here, but I would like Michael Bevan to be
interesting.
I suppose named as the man at the center of the tournament. I think he's won it 6 times. I think 5 with New South Wales, 1 when he went down to Tasmania in that last hurrah. I think one-day cricket especially in the 90s to early 2000s, he revolutionised what one-day cricket is, particularly with the bat. I think we can be thankful for a lot that he's done in the one-day circuit. And I think one of the criteria was, game-changing roles in one-day cricket. And I think Michael Bevan, if you were to put his one-day batting average, one-day international batting average, next to some of the game's greats, it's almost unparalleled, especially in the era that he played in. So, look, there are a couple of names thrown around. The Dean Jones, if it went to Dean Jones, I'd be happy with that as well. But, yeah, Michael Bevan for me. I think Damo, maybe south of the border, probably disagrees.
No, I'd be fully supportive of that. I was tossing up between Dominic Fawnley and Scott Crebiff-Scofen, to be honest with you. But, there's been some cult heroes. I think Richard Cheekwee's name was mentioned as well across social media. I have one for you here that probably realistically won't happen. But when you look at his domestic one-day career, it does stand out. James Hopes took 155 domestic one-day international wickets. He had a lot of success with Queensland over a 15-year period and had a fair bit of success in the one-day domestic format as well, and did obviously play for Australia for a period of time too, but really did make his way in the one-day domestic format. And, I mean, it's all well and good to think about players that, might have spent a bit of time when there's no Australian fixture, spent a bit of time playing in that competition, but no, I'm of the belief that you look at a player who made a big impact and played primarily in that type of competition. But that's just me.
I think you got no hopes of that happening. I would say, if I'm an adjudicator, Daniel's made a better case because Bevan won the competition 6 times and he's got a stellar international career, whereas James Hopes had more just a stellar domestic career. I've got a few names for you. I think Dean Jones is the name it should be. I think he actually revolutionised one-day cricket before Michael Bevan, and we lost him far too young, and I think it would be a fitting tribute to such a he was one of the first real superstars of limited overs cricket, and I think it would be an appropriate honour for him. Got a few other names, though. I thought it could be named after Kerry Packer, after the way he transformed the game, so the Kerry Packer Cup. I also thought it could be named after the War Brothers because they both, a little bit like Michael Bevan, dominated the domestic competition and obviously were so good for Australia. And then I've got a couple of left field ones for you. I thought Bob Simpson would be someone who's made an incredible contribution to Australian cricket and was part of the brains trust that enabled us to win our first 50-over World Cup. And I think it would be an appropriate honour for him. He also, his test career was pretty incredible. He played as a young man. He retired pretty young and then came back when we really needed him and led the side against the West Indies at a ripe old age of, I think it was early 40s. So if you wanted to honour one of the greats of Australian cricket, Bob Simpson would be a good one. I'm still leaning towards Dean Jones. And then I thought if you just wanted to go a bit of left field, you could call it the Elise Perry Cup because she's probably got a case for being our best ever 50-over player, male or female. And so it would probably be a bit uncomfortable for her because she's still playing. But if you really wanted to make a statement about inclusivity, you could call it the Elise Perry Cup.
Can't see why the WNCL won't be renamed at some point as well, right? So I think there's definitely scope for something like that.
So that could be the Dean Jones Cup. We could just mix it up.
Just reverse it.
Just before you move on, Ben,
I'm not moving on. I want to argue this out. We're going to name it here.
People might laugh about the Kerry Packer one, and I don't know if he'll realistically get the public support because he was more the administrative side of things. But really, he was the one that really made that competition what it was in its prime. It was the McDonald's Cup. He was the one who basically pushed for it to be televised, the one-day domestic format on a regular basis. That was a big part of my childhood, and probably the same with you guys on a weekend during the summer when there wasn't much on. If you weren't a racing fan or whatever, you'd watch the one-day domestic cup. That's what you did. And
Packer, absolutely. And Packer brought in coloured clothing. He revolutionised the 50-over game. He brought about this era of professionalism. He enabled the players to get paid more. But I think, as you say, Damien, you probably want to lean towards a player. So I'm going for Dean Jones. I think he'd probably be the favourite too.
Yeah, I'd say so as well. But I think the sentimentality with him passing so young, that might play a factor as well. You said.
I guess another one would be Shane Warne, but we've got the Shane Warne stand, got the Alan Border medal. Dean Jones. I think that'd be appropriate. All right. Now let's move on to the next cricket headline. Australia plays Scotland tonight. So we're recording this Wednesday night. They play 11 p.m. Australian time. Then they play Friday and Saturday at 11 p.m. So they're afternoon games, which is lovely for us because we get to watch them at a relatively decent hour. And they're playing at the Grange Cricket Club ground in Edinburgh. It's a very small ground. It feels a little bit like a village ground. So Mitch Marsh was asked in the press conference ahead of the game if he'd ever played on a ground like this before, and he said not for Australia. So that'll be quite enchanting, little bit like when Australia goes to New Zealand and you see the sheep running around in the background. But Daniel, what are you looking forward to in this series?
Oh, it's a nice little rematch, I think, for the Scots. They came actually quite close to beating Australia at the T20 World Cup. I think it was a last over chase by the Aussies at the end, and it was probably the Achilles heel of Scotland, the lack of death bowling that probably cost them in the end. They've got plenty of individual talent from 1 to 14, 15 now in 2024, and they're actually making a bit of a push towards the idea of sort of full membership. They're definitely the best, or them and the Netherlands are the best associates sort of knocking on the door. I think, from an Australian point of view, I think the point that we were going to bring up was that it wasn't called a hard reset as such by the Australian group, but I think in nature and looking at the squad and we can look through it in a moment. There's definitely plenty of changes and a look to the future and maybe a look to 2 or 4 years down the track. But yeah, for the hosts, I think they've picked a pretty strong squad. They're a side that should challenge the touring team. I think they might go down 3-0, but I can't see why they can't jag 1 or 2 wins in this particular series. And the Grange is a place where they beat England in a one-dayer. I think it was 2018. So I think it's about 6 years ago now. So they've got history in beating Goliaths in one way or another in white ball format. So I'm looking forward to it. Scotland play a great brand of cricket, quite aggressive at the top of the order, some good power hitting through the middle, and a pretty long batting lineup. The only thing for me is have they answered any questions from their bowling side of things? I think, the likes of Wheel and Sol and Seth and Sharif are good, but not quite your sort of bowling options. And I'll sort of open the floor in terms of what Australia's sort of situation is at the moment, because it's an exciting time. But a few new faces trying to kind of establish their name in a strong group, I guess.
What about you, Damien? What are you looking forward to?
Probably the two CCs, one from each respective side. Cooper Connolly probably set to make his T20 international debut. It'll be interesting to see how he goes. Obviously got a bit of a cult following his success in the Big Bash competition. And I know that carries a little bit of weight, but at the same time, it'll be interesting to see how he goes at international level against, I know Scotland aren't an intimidating opponent on the face of it, but it'll be interesting to see how he goes and steps up at that level. Excitement for him. And Charlie Castle for Scotland, who was raised in Perth, funnily enough. So there's a bit of intertwining there. Of course, was brilliant against Oman at his debut. Interesting to see how he goes against the Aussies. And Richie Berrington, who's been around forever, will be skippering the side as well for Scotland. So, again, much improved. I'd like to see a competitive lineup, and I think we will get a competitive. I reckon at least 2 out of the 3 games will have a competitive scoreline at the end of it. But I think it's a good thing that we see these minnows, and we spoke about it last week, minnows, becoming more competitive. And I think that's one thing, even though maybe we're seeing a little bit of a gulf between the big 3 and the rest, we are seeing certainly the minnows improving compared to where they were 20 years ago.
Yeah, most certainly in T20 cricket, the gap's closing. I'm looking forward to the series because it's great to have some international cricket back. But Mitch Marsh was asked before the game, if it was a reset after the recent T20 World Cup. But Mitch Marsh, throughout the whole interview, was just petrified of making a headline. I don't know who's media training him, but he is very adept at not making a definitive statement. But make no mistake, this is a hard reset. They have brought in a lot of young players. David Warner has left. No Steve Smith in the side. Pat Cummins is not even there. This is the next generation of players. And I think what Mitch Marsh was doing was he just didn't want to put the pressure on the team. He doesn't want a headline, captain says hard reset. Because he was asked about a few other things about should they play Scotland more? Should they do this? Should they do that? And he wouldn't even offer an opinion. So whoever's doing the media training, A+ job for you. I'm obviously looking forward to seeing Jake Fraser-McGurk at the top of the order with Travis Head. That's going to be dynamic. I'm a huge Josh Inglis fan. I think it's his time to shine. Probably in hindsight, we stuck with Matthew Wade, one World Cup too long. And I hate saying that because I'm the captain of the Wade train. Aaron Hardy has been developing in huge strides over the last 6 months. Been playing played really well in the Major League Cricket, and I expect him to do well. And then you've got the two quicks, Xavier Bartlett and Spencer Johnson, who come in because Hazelwood, Stark and Cummins aren't there at the moment. So really looking forward to see the way they go. And Mitch Marsh did say that over the 6 T20 games between Scotland and England, every player should get a game. So that means we will get to see a Cooper Connolly, who's one of those confident young players who all the way through has dominated at underage level. Since he's been in the domestic scene, he's made an impression. Every level he's jumped up, came into the Shield final, made a quick fire 90 odd. So he's a player to watch. And I think you're right, Daniel. This is the sort of team we could see in a couple of years at the next T20 World Cup.
Yeah, it was the point that we brought up last time I was on, I think, in regards to someone like Jake Fraser-McGurk. If he can just kind of learn the lessons that he's picked up over, say, the last 6 months, he burst onto the scene, showed how dangerous and imposing he can be at the top of the order. It's just at times, whether it be in the IPL or in Major League Cricket, he's just faltered a little bit because I think he, if anything, he just goes a fraction too hard at the top. And I think the point that we brought up a few weeks ago still rings true. If he gives himself an over, just to kind of see things, there's potentially no stopping what he can achieve. And yeah, you're right. In regards to the rest of the team, there's so much excitement out of this particular group of young players. We're not exactly, trying to find a diamond in the rough here. I think we've got diamonds just about everywhere. It's just a case of how we manage and how we kind of blend them into a pretty well set lineup. Let's not mistake, outside of one not great T20 World Cup campaign. I don't think we really need to panic a whole lot. I don't think a whole lot needs to change for us to be well and truly competitive in the next. Yeah, but I don't think a whole lot needs to change in the next 2 years.
Well, let me just jump in here. So I think there is pecking order at stake, because you're right about Jake Fraser McGurk. He has not nailed down that opening spot. If he has a shocker of a two here, there is every chance the selectors go, he's not quite ready for the jump up, and they put him out to pasture and they rejig the order, whether it's you put an Inglis up to open with a head. And so there is positions to be fought for. And I think the all-rounder spot is a hotly contested area. Cameron Green, Aaron Hardy, Marcus Stoinis, they're all very similar, and they will be fighting for who is number one. Who would you go for?
In someone like you could throw in someone like Matt Short as well. I know he sort of brings something a little bit different with the ball, but yeah, I would probably say in terms of that mold of all rounders, I'd say Cameron Green's probably your front runner. But again, Aaron Hardy, I think we said it a couple of weeks ago. It's a London buses thing in Perth where you've been struggling to find one gun all rounder who can bowl quick and hit the ball 100 meters, and now all of a sudden you've got two. So yeah, that's probably where I'm heading. But yeah, I think you're spot on about Jake Fraser McGurk, and that's again a spot that someone like Matt Short can really make his own.
It's true. Matt Short's a good call. What about you, Damien?
I know this is predicated. It's an interesting debate. I know it's sort of predicated on what holds more prestige. I agree with you in regards to Cam Green being the front runner in that all-rounder role. But with the greater amount of scheduling and the greater volume of matches that we have across all three formats, it's not something we saw 20 years ago, right? So I do wonder whether, and again, it depends on prestige and it depends on priorities. Do you give, for regular T20 international type of series that don't have the same meaning or prestige as, say, a World Cup, do you give Aaron Hardy a bit more of a go, given Cam Green have a big workload during the various test series that we have, and ensure that there's enough cricket being played by those that are coming through the ranks that might be in that second tier for a particular role?
Well, actually, it's funny you say that, because Mitch Marsh was asked about that, and he said because the games are pretty close, you will definitely see players rotated. And you're right. Someone like Cam Green, he's not going to play. I think there's games Friday, Saturday. He's not going to play both games. But also recently, George Bailey, when he was on the cricket podcast with Eddie Cowan, he was saying they do try and use these tours to just get bits of experience into players like Spencer Johnson, like an Aaron Hardy. So if there is an injury, then they've got a little bit of experience at the top level to fall back on when they're called into the side in maybe a more important game, as you say, a more prestige environment. So I think these tours are perfect for it. In the end, Australia have got the most to lose from this series. If we win, no one's going to remember it. But if Scotland sneak a series win, then it'll be talked about for the next 20, 30 years. So Australia have got everything to lose, and the pressure's on them. So that's the way I see it.
Even if they lose one of the matches, it would create headlines, wouldn't it? I'm not calling it out, but I'm just saying I reckon that would still create headlines.
Yeah, lucky this weekend is AFL and NRL finals, so most Aussies
that's why CA agreed to it, right?
Yeah. But you can imagine if the Scots win, it'll be back pages on the English papers. The tabloids will enjoy that. All right, well, we're going to take our first break on Cricket Unfiltered, then we'll be back. You're listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I'm Menas. I'm with Damien Watson and Daniel Beswick. And there has been some rather unfortunate news reported this week that Will Pucovski has had to retire from first-class cricket. Those claims have been refuted, and there's been no clarification on whether the reports are true. What does appear to be true is that he will not be playing this summer any first-class cricket for Victoria, but it would appear there is some kind of legal discussion going on between Cricket Victoria, Cricket Australia, and maybe what Will Pucovski is due for compensation if he's forced to medically retire. So I guess, firstly, if he is not to play this summer and maybe will then retire, I think it is the best thing for his health. Unfortunately, you would not want him to have a serious medical condition just so he could play a bit more cricket. So, and I feel for him having to retire so early. I mean, Damien, you're down in Victoria. It's a really sad situation.
Yeah, it was big news when this broke. I know it's, as you said, it's not 100% certain yet, but certainly a lot of the journos have gone with it. And it is somewhat sad, isn't it? I mean, so much potential. I still remember that 2020 Shield bubble summer. He was creating so many waves. One of the best Shield innings you'll see, that 202 that he scored at Carrarolton Oval, 27 boundaries as part of that. And I think he scored another century at the Glenelg ground. Remember when we had that hub in Adelaide? He just dominated that period, and he got his test debut off the back of that for Australia. He just played with consummate ease, it seemed, and it seemed like he had jumped over that hurdle as well in regards to concussion. So, yeah, you just wonder what might have been, I think, if he does never play again at international level, because he had the technique, he had the class, he had the poise in most instances, and he was pretty consistent when he was on song as well. I think for a cricket purist, he typified what you want to see in a batsman.
Yeah, I got to call 100 of his at the SCG. Maybe it was last summer when he returned, and he made a laborious 100. As sad as it is, I do think we can't get ahead of ourselves, because I think in the end he was a beautiful player to watch, but slightly overrated, because in the end he didn't pass this test. He, whatever it was against the short ball, he just couldn't work it out. That last hit, he froze. And they say playing first class cricket is the ultimate test of everything, your mental and physical game. And unfortunately, he just wasn't able to pass that test. And hopefully he comes back in a few years maybe, but in the end it just didn't work out. Like, I know it's terribly sad, but I don't think he would have had this amazing test career, because if you can't play the short ball, you're not going to have a great test career.
Yeah, the thing that I have thought about with Will and his career is that, if he was to kind of stymie it earlier, let's say, 5 or 6 years ago, I don't know, in terms of the actual number and the rate that they sort of happened over time. I think I read at one point he had about a dozen concussions before the age of like 22 or something. And that was across 2 sports and other activities outside of cricket. But the inhibitions you would have after being struck multiple times, I can't sort of comprehend how hard it would be to come back from that. And for him to still be playing first-class cricket at a decent level as recently as, say, a season or two ago, kind of goes towards just how, I guess, in some ways he was strong mentally just to kind of keep going and to keep ticking along and to give it a crack. But, yeah, I think, push has sort of come to shove on this. And I've been lucky. I've run into Will before. I've done a little bit of work. He did some commentary at 7 when I was doing some stat stuff for them during the BBL, and he's he's an articulate guy, he's an intelligent guy, and for him to go through more traumas like that, it can't be good for him. And there's a bright future for him doing something along the line of whether it's sport or in any other sort of professional field. He's got, he's an intelligent guy, he's articulate, as I said. So, you're kind of hoping that, the people around him are making the smartest decision for him and his professional future and his personal future, because, we want him to kind of enjoy a rather risk-free and, untroubled life from here on in. And, I just fear in the future, and with the research that we've got on things like this, how impeded he is already. So, yeah, I think you're right. It is time, and it's an unfortunate way for a talented player to kind of go out.
I guess there is some murkiness around how many concussions he's had, and that's kind of been wrapped up in some performance anxiety he's had that he's spoken about. So it's a very complex situation. But I guess translate that to being an international cricketer wearing the baggy green. You're under the microscope all the time. I mean, so I think, as you said, Daniel, best thing, walk away. He can come back if in 3 or 4 years he wants to give it another crack. He'll be 30, still got plenty of runs left then. But until then, I think it's best he takes an extended break from the game. All right, moving on to our next cricket headline. Joe Root has had a stellar test match at Lords against Sri Lanka. He scored a century in each innings. That now takes him to 34 test 100. That's the highest for England. He went past Alistair Cook. And this has brought about a lot of discussion around who is the best test batter at the moment. And Crick Info wrote a good report comparing the Fab Four: Smith, Williamson, Kohli and Root. And Damien, if I were to say to you who is the best test batter in the world, what would you say?
Oh, I'd say, well, in terms of form right now, I know it's easy. We often go with recency bias in these things, but Root's probably the most in form. To me, Smith, in a technical perspective, I know people say he can be overly technical. At his peak, to me, he's number one. Kohli has obviously the pedigree and the record behind him, but he's played for a fair amount of time. So there's that element that you got to take into account as well. I'd say Smith based on ability, but at the moment, Root's the most in form. And I should mention too, how about Gussie Atkinson as well, taking a 5 for the second innings, 5 for 62. So there you go. You were asking questions about their bowling stocks, Minners. Maybe he could be the grand messiah. Who knows?
Well, he also scored 100. I mean, he had an incredible test match. He scored 100, his first-class century, his first test century, took 5 wickets in the game. So he's, I think, the 35th player in history to score 100 and take 5 wickets in a test match. He's exactly right. He's only the third Englishman to ever do it. I think after Tony Greig and Ian Botham. He's the third player to do it at Lords. That's an incredible start to his test career. Seven wickets on debut, 10 wickets in the match, and now he does this at Lords a few weeks later. That is one phenomenal collection of records. And he's probably not even a very good player.
It's easy to say for us here behind a microphone, isn't it?
Well, I'm not saying
I agree.
He'd be good for me. I'm just saying, like, he's, sort of bowls military medium and whacks a few down the order. I mean, there's a dime a dozen of those in county cricket.
Yeah, well, the thing I do like about him is that his bowling action and the way he bowls challenges right and left-handers both with the new and the old ball. I think that's probably what sets him apart as a little bit of a point of difference. He's sort of had to put his hand up and audition for that role that's sort of been left by...
This is good for an English cricket podcast, Daniel. But
I know, but by James Anderson, but he brings something a little bit different to the table. I think he's almost had a hat-trick in his first over of Test cricket or something.
Yeah, it's a fairy tale. It's unbelievable. He's on every board now at Lords, and he's done it in a few weeks. I mean, that's an incredible rise. But
we'll wait till he comes out here and gets battered by everyone.
Yeah.
There you go. Does that make you?
That'll be the test, won't it?
It will be, yeah.
But that's also the test, because Damien derailed my Joe Root conversation, but we'll get back to it. That's also no, Mr. Bingham's joking. But Joe Root hasn't scored a test 100 in Australia, so I think that's a big blight on his CV. He hasn't done well against Australia in Australia, so that's something you'd like to rectify. If you compare him against Smith, Smith has had incredible series in India, incredible series in England. He's done it everywhere. Smith has that all-round game. So there is a little bit of a hole in Root's CV with the performances in Australia, but he's still so young. He's only, I think he's 33, maybe almost 34. He'll be 34 in a few months. So he's got maybe 5 years of Test cricket in him. So a couple of records are beckoning. He could score the most ever Test runs. He's about 3,500 runs away from that, and potentially could score the most ever Test centuries. He's got 34. Tendulkar had 51. If he plays for 5 more years, it's not impossible. I think the runs is more likely, but I would be disappointed if Root went past the Tendulkar record. I think that has just such a special place in the history of the game. I don't know if Joe Root is the person I'd want to knock off Sachin Tendulkar.
At the risk of playing devil's advocate here, Sachin probably hung on a little bit too long towards the back end in that quest for 100 international hundreds, and for him to get to 51. I mean, yeah, to be honest, I can't see Joe getting there because I just think he'll probably move aside at some point beforehand. But I mean, that record's probably going to stand almost for the rest of Test cricket because I just don't see anyone playing 200 Test matches anytime soon. And
but Root's a prospect because he's been playing for so long, and he doesn't play. He's not a T20 star, so he could obviously play in T20 comps, but he could just decide to do what James Anderson and Broad did and just play Test cricket, get his few million quid a year, not a bad living, play 15, 20 tests. I think it's a strong possibility.
Just doing the maths, right? So he's played 145 Test matches now. How many Test matches do England play a year? Let's say they play...
Say 12.
At least 12 a year. 5 years.
Well,
30.
Daniel, he could do it. He could do it.
He could do it.
Damien,
I
what
don't
do you
think he will.
Before Daniel does maths. Damien?
It's every possible. I see what you mean but I think that comes down to, I don't know if Joe Root I think we get influenced by the cultural element, right? So Joe Root, as much as he is a household name in the UK, I don't think he transcends culture like Ted Dulker did in India.
No, not at all.
Cricket. So I think there's that element that we get caught up in too. And, Ted Dulker, to me, had the best straight drive, the best technique that I've ever seen. So, people always compared him to Bradman. Bradman himself compared Ted Dulker to himself back in the day, right? Whereas I don't know if Joe Root had that same. I mean, he's entertaining to watch and he's very fluent at his batting, but I'm not sure if he had that same style necessarily that we just are in awe of. But I'm not trying to detract from his record, but he doesn't transcend culture like Ted Dulker did.
No, I agree with you. And just a couple of things, though, on the stellar rise of Joe Root. So Cricinfo published these stats. Between 2014 and 2019, Steve Smith averaged 72. That's 5 years averaging 78 Test cricket. He scored over 6,000 runs with 24 Test centuries. Williamson in the same period averaged 62, scored 1,700s. Coley averaged 59, scored 2,200s. And then Joe Root averaged 50 and he made 1,500s. And I don't know if either of you remember, but the knock on Root then was he couldn't convert the starts into big scores. He was getting a lot of half centuries, but wasn't making the hundreds. But then since 2021, Joe Root in 48 Test matches had scored 1,700s. His average is just under 57. So the big thing Root's done is he's learned to convert. In that period, Kane Williamson scored 900s in just 18 matches. And then you can see where Smith came back to the pack a bit, 600s in 34 matches, averaging 47. So there has been a distinct notch down for Steve Smith. And you can see Root's conversion rate just went right through the roof.
One more point to probably add is that how many times has Joe Root walked out to bat and England are 2 for not many?
It's
especially
true.
in the last 5 years, like whether it be in England or when they've come out here and saying that, his record in Australia is probably puts an asterisk on the record. But if he can come out here, let's say he has 1 or 2 more series, like what is it, next summer they're out here again. If he was to,
so that would be probably his last, isn't it?
Yeah, you would think so.
Unless he really hung on. I mean, remember when Gooch and Gadding came out here? They were almost 40, weren't they?
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's Joe Root. That's a lot of praise for Root. I do like Joe Root. I think the captaincy wore him down, and it's good to see him back to flourishing at the crease. All right, next cricket headline. Friend of the show, Jason Gillespie, will be pulling his hair out at the moment because Pakistan have been beaten by Bangladesh at home 2-0. Pakistan have not won a game at home since returning to play Test cricket in their home country. And in this test match, Bangladesh was 6 for 26 in reply to 274. They got out of jail and made 262 Bangladesh, with Lytton Das making 138. From there, they swept to victory. It is a famous victory for Bangladesh, but the below torch is on Pakistan cricket at the moment. Gillespie, who's just taken the job as test coach, Shan Masood, the skipper, is under an immense amount of pressure after a disappointing string of results. And I mean, I guess Daniel, great for Bangladesh. I mean, I know this is in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, I mean, considering the position they're in, as you said, 26 for 6, so just like looking at the lineup that they've got at the moment and the team they've sort of put together, the top order batting is probably where they're lacking a little bit, but they've unearthed a couple of extra quicks to help out Tuscan Ahmed. Hassan Mahmood and Nahid Rana are both exciting prospects. Nahid is on the quicker side as well, so definitely a sort of player to watch. And Mehdi Hassan Miraz, just in that sort of bowling all-rounder molds, is the kind of guy that can kind of roll out 60 overs of finger spin if you need him to when conditions suit, and he's more than capable at number 8. Shakib and Lytton Das are your kind of engine room, even though they're sort of batting a little bit further down with Mushfiq kind of at 5. They're an exciting prospect, and we know that Bangladesh politically hasn't been in a particularly fantastic way at the moment. So for them to win this series with a clean sweep is just another tick to what they're kind of doing in the longer format. I think to kind of and to put it into the lens of the World Test Championship, it's not outside the realms of possibility that they now make a World Test Championship final. They're 4th, and I haven't really crunched the numbers, but
don't do it on the show again, please.
Yeah, India and Australia are 1st and 2nd on the table, but they play 5 test matches against each other, so they'll eat away at each other. Bangladesh do play India in the cycle, and granted, it's away from home, so they're going to have to step up another level if they are to challenge on that front. But yeah, it's not outside the realms of possibility that they sort of make a little bit more history in the next sort of 6 to 9 months of Test cricket. It's exciting, and then I don't know, we might want to talk about Pakistan in a minute, but Jason Gillespie might have the hardest job in world cricket at the moment. Pakistan head coach. They are a rabble on the field. The board, they've shaken up the selectors multiple times in the last couple of years. It's a place, only now where it's been considered safe to go. You've got a disillusioned fan base, but also a delusional fan base at the same time. I don't really know how that's possible. And you don't have a team as good on paper as India, and you have just as much pressure on you. So, yeah, good luck to Jason. He's certainly put himself on hard mode there in terms of game difficulty and how he wants to sort of go about his career in coaching. But yeah, I don't really know where they go from here either, to be quite honest. And Bubba's out of form too.
Yeah. Amazing, isn't it? And I do wonder where they go from here, because it doesn't seem like, we discussed this last week, Menders, it's not just the problems on the field. It seems like there's some fractures off the field as well. Sometimes it's in the emotion of the game, but seeing Dizzy lose his cool a couple of times, which we don't often see with a player or two, so, and even the players at each other. So I do wonder whether there is unrest there in the camp. I'll throw this open to you two. Does this, given the political hostility within Bangladesh, the fact they've beaten the recognised opponent, would this stand as the greatest Test series win, or even one of the Test matches, the greatest Test match victory in their history?
I mean, it would certainly be up there, because historically they were part of Pakistan for so long, and so there'd be that intense local rivalry that you get. I'm just trying to think if Bangladesh has beaten India in a test match, because they must have. That would be, but to win a test series in Pakistan, you're right, it doesn't get much bigger than that for Bangladesh. Absolutely.
I think they won. I don't know if they won the series, but they definitely beat England in a test match back in like 2016 as well, which would have been pretty significant. I think it was
they beat Australia, as well.
Anyway, good on the Bangers. Good on them. All right. We're going to take our final break, then we'll be back with Can't Let It Go. Welcome back. You're listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I'm Menners. I'm with Damien and Daniela. Don't forget, if you want an ad-free feed of Cricket Unfiltered, head to our Patreon page. You can subscribe there and get an ad-free version. Should be promoting that more because you get the version without all the breaks. Anyway, let's get into our last cricket headline and then can't let it go. So I've done this on purpose. I'm not talking about the WBBL or the BBL draft. It was a disaster. It was terrible. And everything about it annoyed me, so I don't really want to go into it. I don't think the players are too bad that are coming, but it was the... Now I'm talking about it, see? I've tricked myself into talking about it. And I'm not going to go into... All I'm saying is the coverage was diabolical. The results were diabolical. I'm with Tim Payne. Just chuck it out. It's not working. But what did strike me was a little headline on Quick Info that is quite concerning. There is a report that the England players that are playing in the WBBL will have to miss the end of the tournament due to a national tour of South Africa. So now the WBBL is getting like the BBL, where when you get to the important games, the best players decide to head off.
It's not the first time this happened. This has happened in the WBBL either, though. I remember 2019, there were a swathe of England players that were in very good form in that particular summer. I'm talking Danny White, who was playing at the Renegades at the time, Nat Siffer, who was playing for the Scorchers at the time, etc. They had to leave probably a week before the finals started. And a lot of those teams had to bring in reinforcements. So it's not the first time this has happened, but you're right. If you want to stand out, this is where, say, the 100, for instance, gets a bit of clear air. It doesn't really have to compete with much, whereas the WBBL, I suppose it's always going to be a case of you're going to collide with something internationally.
It doesn't often happen, though, for the WBBL. Normally, there is a bit of a window. So very disappointing.
They've had to adjust to cater for the World Cup as well. So it's a hard thing, isn't it?
Wasn't Danny White the first pick, I think, and she went to the Renegades? I don't know, whatever. That could be wrong. Maybe it was the Hurricanes. No, it was just the coverage was like pulling my fingernails out. Like, yeah, these stilted interviews. Like, you have these people in the draft, and you've got roving reporters. I just don't think it works to talk to people. Like, just let them. What you need is interesting people reacting to it. Like, get Daniel on there with his crazy stats. Get all these people who are into the Big Bash actually analyzing the draft, not going up to someone who's in the draft where they're petrified to say something, and you get these these jilted, stunted interviews. I'd turn it off. I had a meltdown about it.
Isn't that the case in most drafts? I see that with the AFL as well, in the sense that it's pretty struck. Well, we're different to the US. Are you suggesting we go like the NBA or the NFL drafts, where there's a bit more?
I think you don't interview people. You don't go up to sit on the Hurricanes bench and ask them how they're feeling about the draft. Like, if you think you're going to get good TV out of that, you're a fucking idiot, because you're better off having a panel up there reacting to the draft. But the problem is nothing exciting happens in the draft, so there's nothing to react to. Oh, this player was passed in. Oh, that player, they matched the bid, so it's going to them instead. So it's just a terrible, terrible waste of time. And it generated zero buzz. And I love cricket. I love the Big Bash. I love the WBBL. And I have not one person on Twitter, not one person in the world was talking about it. Yeah. Okay.
I was just processing that. No, there were a few people that were talking about it, but look, maybe you could pizzazz it up a little bit more. I would agree with maybe adding in a panel of analysts that would, even if there was nothing much happening, maybe you preview how each side is going to go, just to add that element to it. But I guess to play a different point of view, Betters, it's a draft, so it's pretty regimented in the way you go about it.
I don't mind the regimented nature of the draft, but there's nothing exciting about it because of the way the structure. There's not enough at stake. Pete,
I think too, there's the whole the retention thing, or a team can go out and pick a player. Oh no, the owning team has rights to that player and can just kind of Matt straight away. I think it would make more sense, and maybe this is me with my sort of NFL fan hat on, where you're only sort of putting out free agents or new players into the draft system to actually be drafted. Make the decision, make there be like a cut day, say a week or two before the draft, where you go, okay, we definitely do not want the services of player X, therefore they can go back into the draft. Instead of
Glenn Maxwell might be in the draft.
Yeah, and then, instead of having, like we really want to pick this player, and then, they're owned by another team and they just turn around and go, oh, no, we actually want to keep them. Sorry, you're going to have to pick someone else. It kind of, I don't know. I just feel like you're only really delaying people there. Yeah.
All right. Well, that was our report on the draft. We got there in the end. Now let's wrap it up with Can't Let It Go. That little bit of cricket news you just can't let go through to the keeper. I'm going to open the batting on this one because I've got a really quick one. They've announced that the World Test Championship final will be played at Lords next year for the first time ever. So June 11th next year it kicks off. Daniel's predicting Bangladesh playing India there. I'm still having faith in Australia making the World Test Championship final, but will be played at Lords for the first time ever. I think with the last one was in the Oval. Where was the first one? Was Southampton. Yeah, because it was in a bio bubble. So that's my Can't Let It Go. June 11th next year. Put it in your diary. Hopefully Australia will be defending their World Test Championship crown. Damien, what's your Can't Let It Go?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that the Australia v Scotland, I think they decide it, I could be wrong here, but didn't they decide it just recently that it was going to be on Fox Sports and KO, the Australia v Scotland T20 International Series? I think it's a late thing. So good to see that it is getting televised as well. But you got to remember, it wasn't that long ago, even when Australia played a test series. This is a test series, not just a one-day or T20 series. A test series in Sri Lanka or India or Pakistan in the 80s and early 90s. They weren't even televised. So
dark days, Damien. The days of hell, I call them. Just
I was going to ask. I can't let
yearning for reports, just little dribs and drabs that the ABC would give you.
With Jim Maxwell, he used to do those televised reports. How the hell did you think back then?
Yeah, I didn't. So, radio was a huge thing back then. So you obviously cricket was on the radio all the time, and even the Shield. No, but the Shield, like there was always cricket on the radio. There'd be Shield cricket, so you could just have it on all the time. But I remember that tour of Pakistan in '94, where you were only getting reports on the news every hour. And Steve Waugh was heading to 100, and I stayed up for the mail to come in, and then came in. I think he got out for 98. But as then you can imagine, Damien, can you believe how much I loved Cricinfo when it came onto the scene? The fact that anywhere in the world I could find out a cricket score. I was backpacking in Spain in 1999, a mullet, just the typical eating beans out of a tin. And I logged on to see that Justin Langer and Adam Gilchrist had chased down almost 400 against Pakistan at Belrive Oval. So, yeah, thank God for the internet.
Well, I remember even as a kid, you'd look at Cricinfo and it had a ball-by-ball description. And it's funny, the imagination of the theatre of the mind, how you just... We couldn't afford pay TV in my family, so I used to... This is how weird I was. You'd watch Cricinfo and the next ball would come up and you'd wait probably about the next 30 seconds and then the next update would come up. Like, wow.
I remember when Optus Sport bought some cricket. So they bought an Ashes series, and I had to go to a pub to watch it because I didn't have Optus Sport. I think that was 97, the 97 Ashes series. Yeah. And then I had this friend of mine, this lovely young lady at the time, who had Optus Sport at her house, and she couldn't understand why I kept asking her to come over, and she couldn't get rid of it. But Dad was a big cricket fan, so he'd have it on. And she'd be like, "You're going to go?" And I'd be just sitting there watching it. So
you accidentally left your sunnies there just so you could have.
Yep, yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah. Oh,
it's funny that Sports Australia back then.
Exactly, and that was the game where in '97 Australia were bowled out in the first session
Yep.
And Thorpe, the late Graham Thorpe, and NASA put on a huge partnership and actually won a test match, and they were leading 1-0 in the Ashes. And yeah, anyway, I digress. Damien, so what's your can't let it go? Good on the internet or technology? I'm lost.
It reminds me that we've got it pretty good, I think, in terms of coverage now. Probably take it for granted a little bit.
It's true. I mean, I was watching the CPL is free on YouTube at the moment if you're in Australia. So I've had the CPL on all day.
And well done to Barbados. Barbados Royals, I think, got the job done in the women's. I was watching that. So
I did. Yeah. I did watch the women's final, and there were some Aussies playing in that one.
Yeah, Amanda J. Wellington, Laura Harris. So
but the winning team was it Georgia? Anyway, whatever. It was on. Yeah. Okay, Daniel, what's your can't let it go? Sorry,
I got to give a shout out to a team who have probably never been mentioned on the Cricket Unfiltered podcast before. Mongolia, their men's team have entered the ICC T20 World Cup qualification pathway for the first time. They're currently playing in sub-regional action in Malaysia. Team that only became an ICC member in 2021. They're probably going to lose every single match here, but just to even put up a team and compete in T20 World Cup qualifying is awesome. And I got to give a shout out to one guy. Batulga Gombo is his name, and he founded the Mongolian Cricket Association in 2007 because he saw cricket for the first time in Australia in 2005 when he was visiting his wife, who was out here on exchange studying at Monash University. As I said, they're probably not going to win a game, but they have sort of endeavoured to play some cricket. They played in the Asian Games. They played Japan in a 7-match T20I series just to get ranking points and to get themselves onto the list. And yeah, it's the start of a cricketing journey. You got to start somewhere, right? We were all in the position that Mongolia once were. We were all in a position that Mongolia are in right now. So it's good to see their progress. And shout out to my boy, Luzan Zundui Erdinabulgan. He's got 15 wickets in 12 T20Is. He's a name to watch out for at an average of 26.6 to boot as well. So Erdinabulgan, remember the name.
I don't think I will. If I'm honest with you, I don't think I'll be able to. Daniel, question. Are you one of those people that thinks these sort of teams are ruining the stats in T20 international cricket, that not all international games are equal?
No, I'm in the opposite camp. I think that we should be smart enough as a sport to kind of be able to contextualize what is crazy and ridiculous and what's in the record books. The argument that I always use to kind of counter this is that Australia beat American Samoa 31-0 in the FIFA World Cup qualifier in 2001. Archie Thompson scored 13 goals, which is the most in an international game. Do we think Archie Thompson is the greatest striker that's ever lived in football? I'll tell you for free.
Victory fans would say yes.
But the point stands. And then, just to be, I think, in the record books is significant. I mean, Japan got touched up in the 95 Rugby World Cup by New Zealand. I think New Zealand put on 145 points on them. And now you only have to go to 2015 when they beat South Africa in a World Cup game. So I don't know. I think it's just, I know history's written by the winners, and a lot of people will potentially disagree, but I think it's just a case of perspective on stuff like this. I think you can take records and contextualize them for what they are, rather than get all uptight that a select few are the teams that have the privilege to be in record books and stuff like that. I mean, cricket's already elitist enough as it is in terms of membership and funding and things like that. So I think to see something like this is cool. And quite frankly, who cares if Mongolia get bowled out for 20 in the grand scheme of everything going on? It's a record. And the SEN Ulaanbaatar radio coverage might be interesting that particular day, but yeah, I mean, in the
so I get it. I knew the answer I was going to get. Yeah, and I agree. You can't start to rank different international games, and I think that's why T20 cricket is the most beautiful vehicle to grow the game, and it doesn't really take a luster like the stats. I'm not even going to try and say his name, but his 15 wickets at 26 are not the same as the wickets that are going to get taken tonight for when Australia plays Scotland. But you're right. Everything you said, I agree with.
Yeah, there's more context in his though. Like he's done it in a pathway event. These wickets they'll take in this game are in a meaningless bilateral series when it's all said and done. So you can look at it from that way as well. Not, I'm not saying
Mongolia's cricket future is at stake.
And funding, international funding and ranking points, they're important.
Well, Damien, I learned far too much about Mongolian cricket tonight.
I love it. I think it's great.
Anything you'd like to leave the listeners with? Where can they catch up with you? Are you doing anything for the AFL finals?
No, they are doing Blues Radio this week, Metters, but I don't think Carlton are going to win. But you can catch me on Twitter at Damo_Watts. I'm doing the grand final post-match talkback, Metters, in the AFL. So if it's GWS v Brisbane, I'm probably not going to have too many callers, but I'm hoping hopefully we get a Victorian team of some description.
So you'll be on SEN straight after the GF?
Yeah, I think so. Or that night, yeah.
Great. We can ring up if you're battling for numbers. I can.
Yeah, we'll talk cricket. At the end of the day, people forget about football as soon as we hit 6 o'clock on grand final night. So.
Yeah,
I'll have some hot takes if the Swans win. Don't worry.
Yeah, it's the start of cricket season once the final siren goes.
Yeah.
Daniel, where can the listeners keep up with Mongolian cricket and yourself?
Emerging cricket. Basically anywhere and everywhere if you are so inclined, and DG Beswick 1 across Instagram or Twitter, or basically Threads, Carrier Pigeon, anywhere.
Do you have a pager?
No, I'm trying to remember what my first mobile phone was, but it definitely wasn't. Yeah, I definitely didn't have a Blueberry or a page or anything like that. So
Blueberry or Blackberry?
Oh, see, that's how you know I'm battling.
All right, guys. Well, that's it for this episode of Cricket Unfiltered. Remember, check out all the links in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in. And next time we record, we'll be able to reflect on the series versus Scotland.